Uh, Good morning, everyone. My name is Kim Zielinski. I'm a school counselor out at A.W. Beatty Career Center. We're located in Allegheny County, which we serve the 9 northern area school districts in the Pittsburgh area. Can everyone see my screen? It looks different to me. Erin, am I good?
Yes, I can see your screen.
Okay, good. Yay. All right. So sorry. I'm also well aware that I am standing between you and lunch, so I will be cognizant of that. Anyway, this is my 10th year at Beatty. I did a few sub jobs, but I've spent 10 years here at Beatty, and I love career and technical education. And little did I know when I started my graduate school work that there we go. That data would become so important because you have a stats class, but ultimately I didn't realize what the value of that would be when I started here. So goals and objectives, to be able to implement parts of your data collection into your counseling program to achieve desired outcomes. I'll elaborate more on that one. To educate the importance in data in all aspects of counseling, and to find or renew your hope. So whether you're just looking for some new ideas as yourself as a counselor or your program as a whole, and especially a shout out to all of you that may feel like a glorified firefighter. I see you. I used to be one of you, and I stand by you. So this presentation is really for you. So why collect data? It's definitely physical proof of how your time is utilized. Unfortunately, school counselors are often thought as administrators or kind of like even though we're non-teaching personnel, we're not really seen as educators. We're just that person in the building to do an assortment of items on a day-to-day basis. However, we know that that's certainly not the case. We have a specific purpose. So this really shows how you spend your time, and shows parents or other educators what your role is in that building. So instead of telling them, show them. Can definitely collect data for goal and objective attainment, so resources. And as we all know, education is typically a publicly funded entity where your administration and school board is tasked with the job of spending the money wisely for student consumption. So why is the resource that you want just as important as new math textbooks or an additional English teacher or tools if you're in a career and technical setting? Why is what you want just as important as those items? Collect data for the development of the K-12 counseling plan. So that, as we know, is a living and breathing document that requires yearly goal development, curriculum development, and implementation, and the use of the advisory board meetings. So this data should be collected and added throughout the year, and it should also be able to be extracted and used for other purposes. Move away from random acts of guidance, and I'm going to credit Trish Hatch, the author of the use of data in school counseling. With this catchphrase, she presented to the Allegheny School Counselors Association a few years ago, and when she said that just really stuck with me, that you might get to do, for example, I know I really tried to focus on Random Acts of Kindness Day in February, because it just fits with my moral code, and it was one day. I didn't have to devote a whole week to it. So I got really excited that day that I got to actually do some counseling curriculum for our building that particular day. But at the same time, it felt so random and forced that because I'm so busy doing crisis management on a regular basis. Collect data for reliability. So when we're attaining that resource, it can probably sound like you're a squeaky wheel when you're asking for something over and over again. So this allows you to have some tangible data that shows that things are busy or daunting or whatever adjective you want to insert in there for your own professional experience, that as you claim them to be. So it also shows that you're doing what you say you're doing or trying to do on a regular basis. And then I put sanity in parentheses. I personally, through collecting data, established more sanity in my life. I hope the same would apply to everyone else listening. But so I affectionately call the last 5 school years here at Beatty the surge, because we've had 300, our student enrollment has increased by 300 students. So a significant amount of students in a short period of time. So it was a great problem to have that career in tech was becoming more popular, but at the same time that increased our mental health issues. And because I was the only counselor, I was feeling so stressed out to the point where I started looking at different career options. So thankfully, my friend talked me out of going to a law degree, and she told me to find a hobby, so I did. And then Amazon was talking about building a huge center in Pittsburgh, another corporate center in Pittsburgh. So I figured if they came, maybe I could do something in logistics, but they ended up not coming. And then I did seriously consider looking into a computer-aided drafting degree, because I love housing and how it's built and how it all comes together in the end. But I couldn't find a program that matched my needs in terms of time. So I'm thankful for that now, but I do feel that data collection is important to our everyday sanity, personally and professionally. So I'm just going to dive into some of the ways that I collect data. I think all of us as school counselors definitely should be keeping some sort of interaction log. So it's a daily account of our activities that we do on a regular basis in the student scene. In my building, non-classroom personnel have to submit a weekly summary report. So rather than writing this information twice, I just worked with our administration to submit what you'll see on the next slide is just an overview of how I've spent my time. And this is probably the single most important document that I keep in terms of building the K-12 counseling plan. And it was also utilized in the pursuit of trying to hire a second full-time counselor. And now, because of COVID, we now use my interaction log for contact tracing purposes. So I now highlight the people that I see in person versus just like phone calls and other items. So in case of COVID. So as you can see, I picked the 2018-2019 school year because it was the last full school year that we had without a pandemic. And I think it was the best reflection of the data. So it's an Excel spreadsheet that ultimately is broken down by month. And each month I write down who I see, and then I created different boxes for that. And I do have to credit Dr. David Barkovich, who is a counselor over at North Hills, for the template. He gave me the template of his own creation, and I've kind of modified it throughout the years. But ultimately, this is what I submit to administration in a non-pandemic year to show them what all I'm doing and how I'm spending my time. Since the pandemic, I have switched out teacher discussion, or I've added teacher discussions to that top part of the list. And I've switched out homeschool counselor with the sending district personnel, just because I'm talking to more than just the counselors themselves. I'm talking to the principals, the special education staff, whomever, to try and accomplish things. And needless to say, I will admit, in the 2018-2019 school year, this is not reflective of everything that I did that year. So do as I say and not as I do. In terms of this, I would wait until the end of the day and kind of think about who I met with. And I knew I was leaving people out, but it was just so crazy going from one thing to the next that I did not take the time that I should have to sit down and really fill this out to greater detail like it deserves. And I know there are logs out there if you are the kind of person that wants to track down to the minute of how you're spending your time. I have seen those out there. So there are templates already out there that exist that you can utilize. So continuing on, if you're in a career and technical center, I feel like this next spreadsheet is going to be really helpful to you. I started keeping track of all of the student movement in our building. So whether they switched districts, sessions, programs, left for any reason, came back for any reason. And it feels funny to write that it decreased communication with our districts because I could just send a quick email, saying like, please send the withdrawal form, or even fill it out for them and send it over so they could just sign it and return it. And it also reduced the amount of clerical errors because we would go back and forth like, oh, no, you never sent the form. If I tracked it, then I had it. And we've used this data for different purposes, particularly in our building. We used it for a program to engage students with Beatty earlier on, and I'm going to talk more about that later, but essentially career and technical centers experience what's called a DRIP, where students will enroll in the spring, the summer occurs, and for one reason or another, they decide not to enroll at the career and technical center. So we wanted to kind of address that we had such a significant amount of students leaving from May to August. And this was the data that we used to build that particular program. And I'll talk more about that at a later slide. So this is the document itself. Again, I'm using 2018, 2019. So I even have this broken down by district. And so this, when I broke it down by district, I really saw who I needed to meet with in terms of making sure that they cross-reference their roster so that, and maybe my fellow CTC counselors can relate, you show up the first day of school and there's 7 students sitting in your waiting room because they have a CTC program on their district schedule, but the application never made it over to you. So all of those categories that are listed on the left-hand side are on our transfer and withdrawal form. So that's what I was using for the categories for this that we kind of looked at. So 2 years, there were, I think it was the 2016, 2017 year, we started a program called Hit the Ground Running. And so that was our way of addressing more so the students who withdrew due to lack of interest. And even the students who might have had to be withdrawn due to credits because they just didn't pass at their district and therefore took themselves out of the running at Beatty. So ultimately, this program was set up where they could come in, fill out the appropriate paperwork ahead of time, like the emergency medical form, the career objective form, those kinds of items, and then go in, meet their teacher, make sure they could ask any questions related to the tool and uniform that they would be needing for that program, see the program again if they didn't get to tour it earlier in the school year. And that was really successful. And we ended up doing that for 2 years in a row. And then the surge kind of kept coming, the surge of students. So we didn't really need to have that program anymore. So that's been kind of a nice thing too. This is also very important for career and technical centers. Ultimately, are you keeping track of all the applications that come into your building? So As I mentioned, we started a 5-year increased enrollment. We looked at what districts are they coming from, what programs do they want. We use this data to discuss the enrollment with the districts. So some of our districts would only be sending 11th and 12th graders. And then when we showed them the data, they ended up allowing 10th graders to come too. So it was really beneficial to their students as well as our staff and enrollment here that these students were getting an increased opportunity at career education. And this particular, this data really showed us that we needed more staff support in the building as a whole. Mr. Heasley, our director, also uses this for roster distributions, and he shares the information with the instructors so they can buy the appropriate amount of supplies. It's also compared to the grade level enrollments at the districts. So in our particular area, district enrollment, the past 3 years have been lower in grades 10 through 12, but yet our enrollment has increased. So it really has been an indicator that career and technical education is becoming more popular and more valuable in this area. So that's been exciting to see too. And so this is my data. I also break this down by school district. I didn't feel it was appropriate to show you the school district, but ultimately you can see who enrolled there. The gray spots are, in the case of the programs at the bottom, those programs didn't exist in those years. Network engineering technology still exists, but we combined it with computer systems. And then advanced computer programming was dissolved starting this school year. So ultimately we couldn't take any new applications there. So the student assistance program. So as I mentioned in the beginning, the increased enrollment definitely led to an increase of mental health issues amongst our students. Just more students needed that extra level of support. So the increased enrollment allowed us to justify having our school-based therapist, who was here 1 day a week, come 1.5 days, and then ultimately she was here 2 full days, and then a second school-based therapist was brought in a 3rd additional day. And then I did reach out to our K-12 or our districts, and because I wanted their input in case there were any school counselors that were K-12 in a traditional district. Avonworth used their SAP data to hire a social worker. So this data was also used. I used this to try to have a second full-time counselor hired here at Beatty. Fox Chapel, one of our districts, responded. They used SurveyMonkey to ask stakeholders such as parents, students, staff, and community members areas of concern. So that kind of highlighted a gap in their knowledge of mental health. So they've done a lot of additional trainings for staff and students related to mental health issues. They also use their data to help them earn the Middle States Counseling Department of Distinction. They also do a extensive survey of career interests among I believe they're freshmen. And this information is used to bring in guest speakers from those various fields. So Fox Chapel actually invites Beatty as well to their career fair every year, but of course that there's not a pandemic. And ultimately, it's this massive fair where they have some employers, but they have a lot of parents who might be in a particular field just to come in, and the students can go up and ask them questions about their profession, what kind of education and training is needed, different skill sets, those kinds of things. It's a really cool event to be a part of. So, in my pursuit to try and get into the classroom more, we created this form where just real brief, after we present a classroom lesson, the students can fill it out and provide us anonymous feedback. So ultimately, it can help with curriculum development as well as how we tailor our presentations to the student body. I'll be very honest, I haven't collected too much data on this because this is really the first year that I've been able to get into the classrooms more. And even then it's a challenge because half of the students are virtual, half are hybrid, so they're in front of you. So needless to say, I have not got the data that I want on this portion of my job as much as I would like, but I'm excited at the prospect of receiving it. So we've done a lot of data collection at this point. We're analyzing the data. Now we got to present the data. So who are we presenting it to? Ultimately, I shared the data with our administration. I felt like they needed to know that there was certainly an increase in mental health issues. And when I was trying to justify the need of a second school counselor, I couldn't just go in and be like, well, I want this. So ultimately, I had to have the data to back it up. It was very collaborative, and I knew my administration was very supportive of the idea, but ultimately it's that whole money is a sticking point. How are we going to finance a second school counselor? So we did brainstorm some short-term and long-term solutions. Ultimately, some of the short-term situation or solutions was the office. We hired an office assistant, not just to help me, but alleviate some of the burden of some of the jobs in the main office. But that individual took over going to the classroom to make sure that career objective forms were filled out, advertising the different scholarships, creating the bulletin board. If I have any elementary counselors out here, I give you a special shout out to being able to create elaborate bulletin boards and make it look effortless, because I can spend hours on it and I feel like it looks like my kids did it. And then some longer term solutions was adding the additional school-based therapist. So ultimately, just brainstorming with your administration and seeing how they can support you. Sharing the information with our advisory council was important. So what resources do they have? What are their recommendations? I think as school counselors, sometimes we can get blinders on and get so focused on one thing going on in education that when you open it up to the broader world, they might be able to bring forth some really cool ideas to help you out, or even something that you can tweak. The advisory council here at Beatty has been really instrumental for creating a volunteer program. Ultimately, several years ago, we had a number of scholarships that required volunteering hours, and none of the students had volunteering hours or the time to even get those done, because they were either working more hours in a week than I was between school and a part-time job. They might not have had the transportation. So we collaborated with some local nursing homes and did some in-house activities to make sure that students could gain some sort of volunteering hour. That was, our volunteering program was later absorbed into our BAT, which is our SAP program. We call it the Beatty Assistance Team. And ultimately, we want to reduce the stigma of mental health. So we have students that support us by doing positive activities like blowing bubbles when everyone comes into the lobby, passing out cookies, just little things to just kind of brighten everyone's day, but also get the word out that it's okay to ask for help. Our advisory council was also instrumental in getting us a contact for the local news so we could promote Beatty. We did some other recruitment items, such as getting t-shirts with all of our programs on it for the district counselors to wear on different activities. And they were very supportive of the hiring of a second school counselor. And then also present to your union. Ultimately, are they aware of the data? So going back to the Hit the Ground Running event, when I shared the data, my fellow teachers were unaware of how extensive our withdrawal drip was. Each of them had maybe lost a kid here and there, but when you look at it collectively across 20 programs, it really adds up. So that's how they became supportive of the Hit the Ground Running event. And they also were very supportive of the addition of a second school counselor, because they would have students that would need me that would come down to the office and then be sent back, because unfortunately my time was being devoted to another student who had a larger crisis going on at that time. So they tried to help deal with it as much as possible, and they were very supportive of a second counselor. So we're presenting the data, and now we have to continue to support the data. So ultimately, how I was choosing to support the data was using the K-12 counseling plan, both the old and the new formats. And just like Kathy and Alice said in a previous presentation, if you were able to make it in there today, this is a living and breathing document. So I made this my work baby, and I devote time to it throughout the year, but more so at the end of the year, when I can kind of reflect back on what did I accomplish, what didn't I accomplish, and why didn't it come through. And then kind of look at what are my goals going to be for the counseling plan next year. And then we've also included some other people, just because you're a career and technical center. Sometimes being a school counselor, you don't get all the things that help with supporting the building. So ultimately, we used our co-op coordinator in part of our counseling plan, because she's instrumental in our student to work program. We used our STEM coordinator and NOCD coordinator. He has been going out to the elementary, middle schools, working with them to build support for Beatty. We used our public relations coordinator, who presents to the high school level students about enrolling at Beatty. And we used our English language coordinator, English language learning coordinator, who works with that specialized population, so that everyone was represented in the counseling plan, even though their title is not a school counselor. And then 7 years ago, we started having the recommended 2 meetings a year with the advisory council. And I want to spend a moment and just really, if you do not have a functional advisory board, please take the time to overhaul yours or create one, because this by far is probably this, other than my interaction log, this was such a key part of my success in winning back my sanity here, because you have these individuals from the industry who are coming together and saying, oh, the Beatty is building some momentum and trying to do good things. How can we further support that? So pick a diverse board. So we have counselors from the middle school and high school level. We have parents and students. I always try to have a non-traditional student, so like a female in a male-dominated program area or vice versa on the board. And then we have a couple post-secondary that we have some really great relationships with. We have a school board member. So try to make it a diverse board. And then please, 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 please make sure you ask them for specific input. I've gone to other advisory boards where we're just talked at the whole time, and I appreciate learning all what that particular district is doing, but I'm taking my role there seriously. How do you want to utilize my time on your board? and kind of look at it in that way. How would you want your time utilized? And so we do ask our advisory board for specific ideas with things that maybe we've hit a wall with. So who are your other cheerleaders in the building? So for me, when I was desperately trying to attain the resources to get a second counselor, it was our SAP team, because they were all there. They saw the increased need of the school-based therapy being utilized, and even the students who we couldn't get hooked up with the school-based therapy that were still struggling. And even our administrators were cheerleaders for this too. And then advocate for your students. So I've spent a lot of time saying how data has helped me, but also you need to make sure that you're supporting the data supports how it's going to benefit your students. So I was trying to advocate for them, saying that, you know, when it was just me with 700 students, I couldn't give the students who needed my attention the full attention that they deserved. And then it's process. I'm going to, a small tangent for a moment. The quote, if at first you don't succeed, try, and try again. I tried looking up to see who said that first, and several reputable websites were very conflicted on whether it was Ben Franklin or an author in the 1800s. So I left it blank. But I think we can all relate to that old adage of trying over and over again to get something. So data collection is a process. So you have your goal, you're collecting the data, analyzing the data, presenting the data, supporting the data, and hopefully you yield the results. So I'm very happy to report that at least in my professional experience here, that I was successful with my data collection in terms of obtaining a second school counselor. And it was a 4-year process. So it took a lot of time and energy. And even though I was part of the interviewing process, I did not believe that it was actually going to happen until she appeared at her first day of orientation in August of last year. So with that, there's Mrs. Goodyear and myself. I'm on the left and Mrs. Goodyear's on the right. We hired Mrs. Goodyear for last school year. She was here part-time and made full-time for the 2021 school year, because even though we were going through a pandemic, our enrollment still was continuing to increase. As I mentioned, we hired a second school-based therapist last year. And this freed me up, even though Sarah was here part-time, to be able to speak in the classroom setting more. So I was able to talk about college and career planning more with the students. We did some job interviewing skills with carpentry. So it was exciting to get into the classrooms and build that rapport with students. I was very much energized by that. And I included another quote, which history or the websites were not conflicted on who said it. So the only place where success comes before work is in the dictionary, and that's Fidel Sassoon. I thought that was fitting, since I'm at a career and technical center that has a very bustling cosmetology department. So in the beginning, I said that I was losing my sanity at a very rapid rate. And I can tell you that I gained that back last school year. Professionally speaking, I felt like I was able to focus on more students. I was able to get into the classroom more. My one-on-one meetings with them were a little bit slower, and could ask more questions rather than just trying to put a Band-Aid on the problem. So kind of slowing myself down and talking to them, and, you know, looking for some more longer term solutions to what was going on. Even our staff mentioned to me when they saw me in the hall, I had a few teachers tell me that I looked less stressed, and also received positive feedback about our second school counselor being at Beatty. because Sarah's skill sets are complementary to mine. So I really thrive in the college and career components and preparing for that, whereas she has a strong background in mental health. And I think what was most telling and the biggest takeaway for me for this personally was I was cooking dinner one night, and my husband came home from work and came upstairs, and our children were playing in the other room, and he asked me how my day was, and I said it was fine, and I probably made a comment about it, and then he said to me, he's like, when I come home, you're nicer now. And I was taken aback by it, but then I started reflecting on that comment, that it didn't make me a better school counselor, but it made me a better wife and mother. And so that's why I have the sanity in the parentheses. So if you feel like you're at your wit's end with your job, or you feel like you're not being effective enough, I'm telling you there's hope. So hang in there. So like I said, to my school counselors who feel like they're just putting out fires constantly, I stand with you. So why data collection? Obviously, purposeful data collection can be used for multiple things in your job, whether it's your daily agenda, prioritizing projects, crisis management, long-term planning, counseling plan development, and other resources. So obviously, my other resources was trying to obtain more mental health support for our students. So I was very fortunate, and I joke with Mr. Heasley, our director, that I'm not going to ask for anything big for a few years since I got Mrs. Goodyear and second school-based therapist hired. So with that, I'm going to leave you my contact information. If you have questions or comments, if you're another counselor who was in a similar situation to me, I think please feel free to share your experience, because ultimately being a career and technical counselor, you can kind of feel like you're on your own island and that no one really knows what's going on. So to kind of have that backup, I think helps us all.